What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Joe Patrick on Football, where we just saw the Falcons beat the Minnesota Vikings on the road on Sunday Night Football, the first of their 6 primetime games this year, by a final score of 22-6. And it was a good game. I mean, the Falcons were dominant on the field for the vast majority of the game. The score line was not so dominant throughout most of it. In fact, 22-6 kind of, I think, flatters the Falcons in terms of just generally what this game felt like. It did feel like it was much more on a knife's edge than that final score indicates. It was usually within a touchdown margin for the majority of it, but the Falcons do end up getting the win, a very important win to get them to 1-1 on the year, with Carolina coming up next. Very winnable game based on what we've seen from Carolina so far this season, but on the road it's going to be tough. Of course, don't want to overlook it, but very much a game that it felt like the Falcons needed to have after a disappointing loss in week 1, and it keeps them off of that, that vaunted or that infamous mark of being 0-2, and just the track record of teams being 0-2 and missing the playoffs so often in NFL history based off of that. So they keep the bad juju of the 0-2 stink off of them. And what is the story of this game? It's not the 22 for the Falcons. It's that 6 for the Vikings, and the way that this Falcons defense played in this game, just totally shutting down J.J. McCarthy and this Kevin O'Connell-led offense for Minnesota. Let's get started with the rookies first and foremost. It was kind of the rookie show-out game for the Falcons, having drafted Jalen Walker and James Spears Jr. on the edges in the most recent draft, on top of Billy Bowman and Xavier Watts in the secondary. And what we saw was both of those secondary players come away with interceptions. Billy Bowman with a fantastic break on the ball. In fact, Billy Bowman was unlucky not to have 2 interceptions in this game with just the way that he was breaking on some of these passes. And then Xavier Watts gets one late, kind of cleaning things up on the back end, just kind of playing in that roaming safety area and picking off a pass. More of a desperation heave late by J.J. McCarthy, but great job by Xavier Watts to track that ball and come down with it. And both of the edge rushers come away with sacks. The Falcons were constantly, seemingly getting in the backfield, pressuring McCarthy, hitting McCarthy, just making his life generally uncomfortable. And I think, most importantly, not really allowing him to scramble for too many yards. I know he had one 15-yard pickup when there was like a 20 to go, but it felt like the Falcons just played really well in not letting McCarthy, with I think the limited tool set that he has right now in his NFL career, still not letting that tool set beat them like McCarthy was able to do in week 1 against the Bears. So that was really great to see. And I would also say, one of the things that just generally gets overlooked so often in the NFL, and by us who are talking about games, and we're often talking about the quarterbacks and the exciting plays that happen in games, or the star players, but I just thought generally the run fits by this Falcons defense were really, really good. When you're going up against an Aaron Jones and a Jordan Mason, those are, that's a pretty tough two-headed backfield to go up against. Ultimately, Aaron Jones leaves this game with, I believe, what was a hamstring injury, did not return. But the Falcons were often shutting this Vikings team down when they were in 3rd and 1, 3rd and 3 kinds of situations, and forcing them into some really uncomfortable situations. Then on 4th down, where even the Falcons stop J.J. McCarthy, well, I mean, it was a fumbled snap on the exchange on what was a quarterback sneak, but still, there was no push by Minnesota on a failed 4th down conversion early in the game. Later on, they were able to convert some of these 4th and shorts, but ultimately, I thought what you saw from this Falcons defense was a really comprehensive performance by almost every guy on that defense. I would say that, there were some rough moments from a D. Alford, for example, but really other than that, again, these guys were very, very good, very, very active up front. They were really getting push against this Minnesota offensive line. It was an offensive line that was shorthanded. They came into this game without Christian Darrisaw, and then they lose more offensive linemen during the game, but give the team credit. They went out there, and you can only beat the opponent that's in front of you, and they certainly did that seemingly to a man up front, and that really set the tone for this Falcons defense overall in the game, where the Vikings were not able to string together really much of anything. So shout out to that Falcons defense. I was watching the first half with some friends, some longtime Falcons fans who, I feel like we've been through the wars together, and we were just remarking, it feels like a different Falcons defense. And so credit to Jeff Ulbrich, credit to the front office for bringing some of these players in, for drafting some of the players that they've drafted who really are making an impact right now. And it feels like, we talked about this defense just needing to be league average, and it feels like they can absolutely be that. Now, they have to, I think, be fortunate with injuries. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But actually, well, let's just talk about it right now. The team does lose A.J. Terrell in this game. I believe that happened right before halftime. Could be a significant injury. He immediately, is in coverage and he grabs the hamstring. That's not one that you like to see when a player like grabs the hamstring immediately and goes to the ground. It makes me think it's on the more severe side as far as these things go. Now, I'm totally obviously speculating here. I'm sure we'll get more information, probably not even on Monday, but later on in the week, potentially, as to what the prognosis is for A.J. Terrell. But, this was not one where he just kind of comes up lame, at the end of a sprint or whatever, and kind of, makes his way to the sideline. He was down on the ground in pain and seemingly clearly grabbing at a hamstring where he was, for a time, questionable and then very quickly ruled out of the game. And so we'll just wait and see there. But, these things can really range as to how significant they are. And I know that he dealt with a hamstring injury in 2023. I believe it was... I think he missed about 4 weeks. I'll have to go back and on a future episode check to see how much time he missed there. And I don't even know if it was the same hamstring. In fact, I don't even know off the top of my head which hamstring it was. So we'll see. We'll see there. But I'm not too optimistic about his chances to return, particularly before the team's bye week in week 5, and then potentially after that. And that would be a big loss because he is by far their best cornerback. And I need to tell anybody else that, but he's really a guy. It was kind of interesting. Like, you saw him right as soon as he leaves. Justin Jefferson has a big catch to get the Vikings down into field goal range right before the first half ended, which again was just very, very frustrating. And speaking of frustrating, kind of leads us into our next topic, which was this Falcons offense that was just not able to convert, especially when they got in the red zone, but just generally when they got into the scoring areas of the field, they were not able to convert. We'll talk about that in a second, but first of all, let's talk about them not being able to convert, and then who was converting was Parker Romo, the new kicker. A couple of these kicks were, they were like made by the skin of their teeth, but he does end up 5 for 5, which is a very good mark, obviously, for a game. But I think the one that really solidifies his role as the Falcons kicker in a lot of people's minds is going to be the last one that he had in this game, which was a 54-yarder from the left hash, and cleared the bar with plenty of room, was just a good-looking kick. I would say generally his kicks looked really good. They were nice high trajectory, plenty of power on these things. We were getting a kick again. I was watching with some friends in the first half. We were getting a kick about how just amped he was after he was making even some of these short kicks that were like in the 30s, but very pumped to be back on the field. I think maybe pumped that he's just earning his job and doing his job on the field for this team that desperately needed it. But it's a great outcome for the Falcons in this game to have a kicker who, you go to a new one and he's perfect with a lot of opportunities and also connects on a true test of a 54-yarder. So that's great for Parker Romo, great for the Falcons. I think everybody feels comfortable with that situation right now. And will we now see Koo cut in the coming week? It's very possible. It's not locked on to happen because, frankly, the team could continue to just roll with Parker Romo as a practice squad elevation for at least 3 more games, but you don't want to run the risk of a team that needs a kicker needing to come in and just grabbing Romo off of their roster. Now, if a team did do that, they would have to then add Romo to their 53-man roster, so that would almost certainly come from a team who has an injured kicker, and I don't believe there is one in the league that has somebody injured or somebody who's frankly doing as poorly as Younghoe Koo was. But having said that, I don't know if there's any reason to really dilly-daddle around on this. It seems like it's pretty cut and dry that Parker Romo is going to be the guy at this point in time. I don't know how much more the Falcons would never necessarily need to see based on what he did tonight, so that's great to see. Now let's talk more about that Falcons offense. I think there were some ominous vibes even early on in this game believe it was the Falcons' first drive. They get down into that red zone area, and Bijan Robinson's running like crazy. I think he has 47 yards rushing just on that first drive alone. And then things get bogged down. The plays are coming in seemingly late into Michael Penix. They're breaking from the huddle after the 15-second mark. I note that because the 15-second mark is when the communication in Michael Penix's headset or in his helmet will have shut off at that point. So sometimes they are breaking the huddle with about 8 seconds left, which means, first of all, you're almost certainly not getting that play off if you have motion in it. And secondly, probably means that he maybe didn't even get the entire play call into his helmet in time, and he's just basically calling a play after that based on what he thinks the play should be. So some really kind of rough operational stuff there that they're going to need to get cleaned up. And listen, I think that people need to extend some grace in this situation. It's the team's first road game of the season where they're going to have these communication issues with the noise that's in the building, and the Minnesota Vikings building is, you ask people around the league, they will tell you that Minnesota is as loud as it gets in the NFL because it's a loud fan base. It's that indoor that's just keeping all of that noise in, and it's their home opener, like on prime time. You have plenty of time to tailgate for this one on a Sunday. That's about as loud of an environment as you're going to find. So, I think it's worth saying, like, okay, like, it wasn't good. We don't need to try to sugarcoat it and say that it was okay or good enough or whatever. But I think we can expect that it can improve. We understand that, I'm sure the Falcons coaching staff and the players will get into where the breakdowns were occurring, why they were not able to hear, if that was an issue of hearing, whatever the case may be. It was a good test run to get some of that stuff sorted out for you going forward, and hopefully the team will be better next week when they're on the road in a not so loud environment in Carolina. So, but either way, not good. Also not good was just generally the execution on some of these plays. Michael Penix only threw for, what was it, 135 yards in this game and sacked 3 times. He was 13 for 21, so the completion percentage was still okay, but generally speaking, everyone can understand it was just not a very effective passing attack throughout this game. In fact, the 135 yards, that number is even kind of padded by a couple of bigger completions by Penix late in the game, to one in particular to Drake London that went for 21 yards. It was just not very good, and they'll need to get some of that stuff cleaned up in the passing game. But on the other side of the coin, this team ran for 48 yards in week 1. To a man. We were talking to these guys up at Flowery Branch this week, and it felt like a really, they didn't say this out loud, but it felt like look yourself in the mirror and figure the thing out. We got to be more physical at the point of attack. They did say that, and certainly they were in this game. The offensive line was getting push. They were creating creases, and Bijan Robinson ran for 143 yards in this game, 168 yards total if you include his 25 yards receiving. And as a team, the Falcons ran for 218 yards with Tyler Algier also adding that late score at the end. Now, granted, the Vikings were letting him score at that moment, but still, the Falcons were getting what they wanted from the ground game. If you compare that, ultimately, now we've seen the passing attack kind of where you want it against the Bucs. I think that we'll get into one issue there, but you had a good passing attack in week 1, but you didn't have the rush. In week 2, you have the rushing game, but you don't have the passing attack. If you can somehow merge those things, and it's not to say you just add those totals up and that's what you're going to be, but if you can get that balance right and keep defenses off balance without when they're struggling to have success against either Bijan Robinson or the passing to London Mooney Pitts, that's when this Falcons offense will kind of fulfill its final form, I guess you could say. Is worth noting that what was I going to say about? It's worth noting that Penix still through 2 games has not really been able to connect down the field. He did not complete a pass against Tampa Bay on targets intended targets that were more than 15 yards down the field. I doubt that he had one tonight. In fact, I'd be interested to know what his longest completed pass downfield was in this game. Like I said, he had a 21-yard pass to Drake London, but that was on a quick slant. He also had a 14-yarder to Kyle Pitts. That was also on a quick slant. That was the kind of success they were having. A 15-yarder to Bijan Robinson. That was on a little, dump off, I believe. So, and then 11 yards to Darnell Mooney was the longest for Mooney. So not a lot of success passing down the field for Michael Penix in this game. For 2 games in a row. And I think that is basically down to what he put on display in 2024 in those 3 games that he had, and defensive coordinators just not really wanting to get beaten over the top, not allowing their defenses to be susceptible in that area. And that if they are going to get beat by Michael Penix, I think they want Penix to basically earn it with some of these underneath throws, which is where there's been some skepticism as to how effective he's going to be in those areas. And I would say that while he definitely met that test against Tampa Bay in week 1, he maybe wasn't quite as sharp. And I would say that, some of that lack of sharpness was probably due to, Drake London having been banged up, Darnell Mooney coming back for the first time this year, and them having had limited reps throughout training camp. I think some of these things probably combine for some of the less than optimal effectiveness in this passing attack. But ultimately, if you can start to show your effectiveness in completing some of those passes in the underneath areas, then I would expect some of those more over the top shots to start to open up for this team. But they haven't so far. So something we will continue to track on this podcast and see if they can get that going a little bit more in the future. But overall, it's a great game for this Falcons team, just generally with what they needed, which was a win out of this game, again, to get them back to 1-1 on the season. Fans, I know, will be happy with that, happy with what they saw from this defense, which, I don't want to get too far out and over my skis and say this could actually be like a quality defense in terms, like talking, more top of the league or top 10-ish type of defense. Not going to go there yet. And I would still say that there are some dangers with this roster in general just being thin. And if you're without AJ Terrell for 4 games or 6 games, however long he might miss with this potential hamstring injury, then it's a conundrum for this Falcons team right now, and somebody's going to have to step up. Is that going to be a Natrone Brooks? Is that going to be a Clark Phillips III, who was once again inactive for this game? We'll see. But ultimately, what you got from tonight was exactly what you wanted: a win on the road to get yourself back to 1-1. Have the potential to have a winning record by the end of next week if they're able to beat a Carolina team they should be favored against. So congratulations to the Falcons. Congratulations to the Falcons fans. I know you guys have been waiting for that win for a long time. We will see you guys again here on Tuesday after we talk to Raheem Morris in his Monday press conference, which should be fun after a win. Talk to you then.